Okay, thank you. We're calling this meeting to order. Meeting of the Clausen Board of Ethics. It's Monday, March 20th, 2023 at 7 p.m. And if this time, if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and if we could have roll call.
Commissioner Fenton has not walked in yet. Okay. Commissioner McCullough.
Here.
Commissioner McGinnis.
Here.
Commissioner Nushai.
Here.
Commissioner Traxel.
Here.
That is a quorum, sir.
Okay, very good. Then at this time, we're going to move on to public comment. If anybody would like to speak, again, I just ask that people be respectful in anything that they say, if they so choose to speak. Okay.
Chair, I
This is-
would like to add, to mention that there are, on the original agenda, it did not mention approving the minutes of the last meeting, but I did provide those. If
You
you wish
did.
to amend the agenda and do that. It's up to
Yeah,
you.
yeah, at this time, I bring a motion to amend the agenda to approve the minutes of last meeting.
A second?
I did notice that there was, I believe in the minutes, it said that our next meeting was going to be on the 13th, not the 20th.
Because it was at the time.
Oh, it was at the time?
Yes, it
Okay,
absolutely
okay,
was.
okay.
It was
Okay,
supposed
okay,
to
then
be.
we changed it. Okay,
Yes.
just wanted to make sure that was correct. I second. Did somebody already second?
Seconded, so
And this, so do you take the vote or I just?
No, you do. Is anyone-
All right.
yeah.
Any, first of all, any comment or anything, discussion? No, we'll go ahead and vote.
Commissioner Fenton, not here. Commissioner McCullough.
yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
Nishai.
Yes.
Traxel.
Yes.
Okay, now we're on to new business, which is a review of the ethics complaint filed against Paula Milan by Matthew Binkowski. Before we do that, when we were here last time, I guess it's a little bit of old business. But while we were here last time, I had asked for a couple opinions to be issued. So the first was, I had asked whether I was obligated to recuse myself from the proceedings on account of representing the city of Clausen in the lawsuit brought by George Georges. And at the time, I indicated that I did not believe there was any type of conflict, but again, just in an abundance of caution and ensure that there's no impropriety in that, I wanted to make sure that I was okay. Mr. Nushai did prepare and present an opinion as to the matter, and in the opinion, found that there was no conflict, and that the two matters are actually separate and distinguishable from one another. And so again, that just kind of affirmed what I had believed as well, but we can open that, if anybody has any discussion or would like to ask Mr. Nushai any questions.
It was clear.
There, thank you. The second question was whether Laurence Nushai's seat had expired along with the term, and that was important for us because we needed to decide. It was one of the reasons why we were not able to deliberate the last time, was in order to determine whether or not he should be on the seat. An opinion was provided by Attorney Kara Crofton on the account of Mr. Nushai recusing himself. After reading that full opinion, I'm satisfied personally that when it comes to seats on boards, that the seats kind of remain until another appointment is presented. And so that seems to be very clear law. It seems to be pretty well-established law, and I believe it was clarified and spoken to in more depth by Mr. Nushai in a more general sense at the last city council meeting that I had watched on YouTube. Did anybody have any questions on that?
I agree.
Okay. And we'll proceed. And then the last thing that I had asked for was a legal analysis on Robert's Rules of Order as it relates to Mr. Binkowski's complaint. And so this one, I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to read this.
Yes.
Okay. And ultimately, again, our rule, I guess our position here is to look for whether or not an individual violated one of the, I guess we'll call it, or committed one of the ethical violations as listed in the ordinance. It's not our decision to specifically opine as to the legality of a matter, just whether or not a person's actions have violated the ethical opinion itself, or ethical standards itself. How are you doing?
Sorry, Chair.
Well, that's okay. Just to catch you up, we approved the minutes from last meeting. Okay. And we discussed, we're looking at the opinion from Mr. Nushai and Ms. Kara Crofton that was presented to us on the questions that I had asked. And so I just don't know if anybody had any questions or anything regarding them. I stated that I was satisfied with the findings and the analysis that was provided to us with the supporting case law. Did you have any questions or comments for Mr. Nushai?
Not at this time, no, thank you.
Okay.
So with regard to the legal opinion, I know we're not here to necessarily weigh in or, judge the legalities of, the vote there, but it is worth, I think, at least mentioning that it was determined from a legal standpoint that the vote was within the council's purview. So that's, again, that's not what we're here to decide, but I think it's at least worth highlighting that fact. Are we at the point of discussing and kind of diving into things?
I think at this point, to open this up for full discussion, I think I have to bring a motion, correct, August?
You can do whatever you want. If you'd like to bring people up, you don't have to motion to do that. You can, we're under this, if you want to make a specific determination, you have to make a motion.
Okay.
If you still want to work on discovery and question and answer, that's at the chair's prerogative.
Okay. So then, at this time, we'll open up for just general discussion as to this matter. And
I don't think you have public comment first anyway, right?
we did public comment.
We did, okay, so.
Yeah, it was like one of our normal meetings, quiet.
Yeah. Maybe that's why I didn't notice.
So, I mean, just a couple things that kind of jump to mind here is that, as far as the meeting agenda described as discussing options, discussing the vacancy there, I think that at least from, I guess it could be subjective, but I think you could argue that, there's at least with that, there's the potential that there could be an appointment. And I think that, for citizens, not having an opportunity to weigh in, I mean, there were several citizens at that meeting that did weigh in. A couple people that were there actually like kind of threw their hats in the ring for consideration. So, with that, I see what other people's thoughts are as far as that goes. But that's kind of a couple things that were high in my mind. In addition to during the meeting, there were, while things were happening, I mean, there were, city manager, city attorney, there were 3 other council members. As far as I could tell, there were no objections to anything that was happening at any point. So certainly, I would have a hard time saying that there was anything unethical from what I saw.
If I can ask, is it proper for me to ask August a question?
Sure.
Limits for anything?
Sure.
Just want to make sure. One of the things is that I kind of looked at is the meeting agenda was set, and there was a set meeting agenda to open up for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Have there been times in the past, or is it customary that additional matters are brought before motion, or the agenda is modified by motion during an actual city council meeting? Do you have any personal knowledge or recollection of that kind of in your seat?
All the time. Yeah, I mean, there's motions to amend the agenda, there are motions that come out of nowhere, but when they're motioned and seconded, action has to be taken. Sometimes they come up during council members' comments, they'll make a motion to do something. And those are binding motions, they're motioned and they're seconded, and then there's a vote taken. So it happens all the time.
Now, I guess for me, looking at a lot of this too and kind of going through all the detail, there's, I kind of looked back again, while it's not binding, we haven't set any kind of precedent on anything in the past before. Everything we look at individually and as kind of its own. I still kind of look at how we spend a lot of time deliberating that matter. And I think we spent a lot of time looking at it in a couple different ways. And one was, was there an ethical violation, or was something broken? Or are we looking at something where there might have been something that just didn't look right, or didn't feel right, or there's the potential appearance of an impropriety of something going on? And I think when we looked at that, we kind of said, that's not enough to raise to an ethical violation unless it breaks one of the standards. I'm just pulling up the charter that we have, so that might be a little helpful too. I think that's the opinion, so I'm just pulling up the actual, looking at ordinance number 754. It talks specifically what prohibited conduct is, so gifts would be, receiving gifts is a prohibited conduct, a city official, elected member of the board. There's nothing here to show that there are any type of gifts that were given or received, so unless somebody else saw something that I didn't see.
Yeah, or any nepotism, like of any kind of family relation or, anything to that regard.
Right. And then
I don't even know that any of that was even alleged. It was more, it looks like the, actions against public interest, lack of objective judgment.
Yes, I was just
Right.
scrolling through them just quickly, just again, part of it, I'm doing this a little bit for myself as we practice, and hopefully we don't have any more of these, but if we do, then we're kind of going through that. Again, we looked at the conflict of interest, but I agree with you. We're looking really at, so we have conflict of interest. No city official, elected member may engage in any employment, render services, or engage in any business transaction or activity that's in direct conflict with the duties, so that's not it.
Chairman McGinnis, if I could, on the second complaint, it is specifically spelled out exactly.
Yeah.
He checked off the boxes for which ones. You don't have to go through them all. They're the ones that he wanted that were
I
were
understand.
specific there, so.
Yeah. Again, and looking at, and I understand that, that's why I said I'm just doing this a little bit as an exercise of just quickly going through this, just because of the fact that it is something that we're not normally here actually opining on anything, except the next date to meet. So use of city property, political activity, nepotism, retaliation, we get an annual disclosure. So again, we can look specifically at what was alleged, so actions against the public interest. Now, under the other, maybe it's just easier to start with that, under the other, failure to follow Robert's Rules of Order per the city charter. For that one, I would personally defer to the opinion that was written by the city attorney, which found that which I believe found that they did not fail to follow Robert's Rules of Order per the city charter, or at least I think that's what's kind of extrapolated from that. So in my opinion, as to the other section, that personally, I feel that there's been no violation.
I agree.
But I'm open for discussion on that.
I agree. The third bullet is similar to that too, or a lack of accountability, including Open Meetings Act violations. I think that the legal analysis kind of covers that as well. Anyone disagree with that, or?
Yeah, but I still look at the lack of accountability, if it's in a general sense, it's still a little bit separate from the Open Meetings Act violation, but I think as it would relate to violating the Open Meetings Act, if we're going to take the position that, and in relying upon city council, that there was not a violation, then that kind of nullifies that section. Again, that's in my opinion.
I just have a question.
Absolutely.
I think what is still unclear to me is the notice to the public piece, so I understand. Is my mic not on? Can you hear me?
No, you gotta push the button.
Oh, they're not on for us. What I was saying is, what's unclear to me is the notice to the public requirement when an agenda is changed. I don't know that that's clearly covered by.
I think you're going to hear this.
Jared, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, you're going to hear the same from both August and I. The only thing that is required is that we have an agenda. There's a couple items in the agenda that are required, and I think it's something to the tune of agenda, meeting call to order, and business, any item of business there may be there, but there's no notice requirement as to what that item may be, and then an adjournment portion. So as far as the requirements per se, they're fairly loose in that regard. There's nothing specific required. And that's why I think that analysis that you see that I was able to provide, lends itself to that interpretation that even though council typically does take, as August mentioned earlier, over time has taken the time to amend the agenda or to vote about specific items, it doesn't necessarily, they're not necessarily required to do so from a legal perspective, legally speaking. So the agenda is an instrument that council utilizes, or any board utilizes, to direct this conversation. The more notice you provide, the more information you provide, I think everybody will agree that it'll be beneficial and we'll all be better for it, but not necessarily required. There are certain specific requirements. For example, when we talk about planning commission, site plans, things of that nature, or public hearings, those are mandated to be there, to have notice. But something like the proceeding that was taking place on the evening in question, no, there was no specific legal requirement to be able to do so, as far as notice.
Okay. And then I didn't see it anywhere in the actual complaint, but just from my understanding, is there anything in our ordinances that would require special notice for filling a vacancy?
No, thank you for asking that. Actually, that's an important question. No, there's nothing we have specific, whether on the charter or the court ordinance, that it requires. I know that as part of the conversation that the Charter Commission is engaging in right now, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, and rightly so. I think probably, and council, I think, may have mentioned it as well in their deliberations throughout the time. It makes sense just to have a process, but none so far, so none that would apply to this.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the remaining kind of complaints, the actions against the public interest, the lack of objective judgment, lack of accountability, just in the general sense, lack of honor and respect for representative democracy, all kind of fall under the same type of, it's not the same type of analysis, but I think from the same kind of nexus of what happened. And again, going through the complaint and the timeline, it's and I think to your point as well, Annie, is there was something published saying that there was going to be a discussion about what to do next. And then ultimately, at the actual council meeting, there were individuals that did have an opportunity to come up, did have an opportunity to speak. There were people that kind of put their hat in the ring. But again, just for clarification, when it comes to the appointment of a member for a vacant seat on the council, this is not is this something that somebody needs to fill out an application for?
if that's, you're asking me?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That is not defined in any of our ordinances or our charter. It is an option that they could have chosen, but the option they chose was the one they chose. It's,
There's only a definition as
Yeah.
far as, in the charter, there's only a definition that says the council shall, a timeline.
yeah, there's a timeline, but
Council
not
shall
a
appoint within
process.
30 days. But other than that, the process is entirely up to council.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, the ultimate pick too, I mean, there's no business aspect to it, no family aspect to it, and it seemed just from, the general public, which I guess we are too, it seemed that there was a legitimate rationale. It seemed like there was, some logic to, the ultimate pick, which then obviously had gained consensus from everyone that was there that had a vote that day, so.
Yeah, I know, and that's kind of where it all went. I mean, I know, personally, I don't like to see precedents set, and I think what we saw was a little bit of looking back at if you don't win, then the next, or the first person who loses becomes the next. So I understand the logic of that person got the most votes out of that specific set of circumstances. The thing that's troubling me about rushing to that conclusion is there's a lot of things that could have changed that if a third vote was put before the public. The numbers and the math could work out very differently. And
And I'm not saying that I personally agree with the rationale. My point is that it seemed that there was a rationale. It wasn't, outside of anything, unethical, I suppose.
no, and I understand that too. And again, this is where I think I start to look though a little bit at my concerns deal with getting into what could be the appearance of some type of impropriety. It's the same thing we dealt with before, which is at the meeting prior to that, it was brought up to have a special election, which was shot down immediately, and it was said that, the public should be able to speak, the public should be able to hear on this. It was kind of looked at as another back way to do something that was done the first time around, under the George's lawsuit, under the George's appointment. And so we had the George's appointment, we had that kind of ugliness that came from there. Then we wrap it up to then some more ugliness, kind of at the 11th hour, right again. And then we're coming into now appointing the vacant seat again. And to me, it felt like there was, again, already an agenda put in place to appoint a specific person to the seat when I watched that video. And so in that case, there was a lot of discussion about, at the next meeting, we're going to discuss what the next steps are. So it was a little more than just what was published or not published. I think there was a real weight put to this next time around. We really need to take this seriously. We really need to take this in a cautious way. There was still within the time limit of the 30 days, and there still would have been plenty of time to meet again and be within the 30 days for an appointment. From reading that, if somebody came or didn't come, I think if somebody didn't come to the meeting, they could have looked at that and and thought, okay, all council's going to do is discuss what the next steps are. Maybe the next steps are, we are going to set a process for people to put in applications. Maybe the next steps are going to be, we're just going to appoint whomever we want to appoint. Maybe the next steps are, we're just going to follow this, whatever other additional logic. All of that was stuff that could have come up in the discussion, and then there could have been another hearing on that. But instead, again, something was circumvented. And I think that's probably where a lot of this is coming from, is we end up with, something that we, as a city, fought against and strongly felt was wrong, and then potential conduct and behavior, again, where two wrongs don't make it right.
But can they circumvent something that wasn't already there in place? So you're saying, like, hypothetically, it could have been in place for them to set the next procedures. So I don't know that intentionally it was circumvented. It maybe was, but it wasn't already in place.
What's in place is very loose, right?
Right.
So what's in place is very loose. And I think, again, this is why I had asked about my involvement, and I'm not, in this, is this all started with an appointment that was done a certain way? And it was alleged that process was circumvented. And it was alleged very publicly in videos, so, I'm not telling you anything, it was alleged by anything that we watch here, publicly,
Right.
that processes were circumvented. And corners were cut because one side wanted somebody on the council. And so it was how do I, it came across that way. To then going through it, to then being at a point to where, again, did we not just repeat and make it seem like we ended up with, we're pulling another quick person onto council? And I'm not saying anything negative against Mr. Tinlin myself. This actually is not, it's not about him.
Right.
It's not about him at all. And from what I saw in at the last council meeting, I think he would welcome a detailed discussion on this. So I did appreciate his participation in the last council meeting. So it's got nothing to do with that. That's not what our goal is here. Our goal is just to look at what that is. Now, again, because something might look wrong, does that mean it violated the ordinance?
Yeah, I think that
And
that's a
that's the
different
next-
question of also, it's like, do you agree with the decision? Do you agree, is that how you would have liked to see it? I get, that's a separate question of is what happened there a violation of the, ethics ordinance?
Right, and it's looking at and I agree with you, but it's looking at is it a lack of honor and respect for representative democracy? If the people believed that there was going to be another opportunity to do something, and they believed that they might have been able to be part of the democratic process, and we're not. I think, though, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, and according to the city attorney's opinion, is they essentially had the authority to proceed in the manner that they proceeded. And so I think to your point, whether it feels good or not is really kind of a separate point.
That's true, Chair, but we have the opportunity here for individuals to say that violations are made in the lack of objective judgment, and I don't know that there's case law to talk about that, so I think that we have to consider that separately from something like, and maybe there is, and Mr. Nijai is going to tell me that there is, but I think that that's what you may have been alluding to, is that there potentially was a lack of objective judgment in rushing that process and not allowing due process and the time that
Right.
was allowed to conduct that business and allow public engagement, which gets to the second point of a potential lack of honor and respect for representative democracy. So I think that it's both and. We have to probably consider both and. But there are things there that are well within the scope of the council to act on. But then there are things here potentially too that are challenging for us to consider, because it's very hard to determine what is a lack of objective judgment. But we do have this right now on the ethics complaint form, and I think we need to also take some time to consider what that means.
I agree.
Yeah, you could take any voter decision that you disagree with and say that that's a lack of objective judgment. So it's, I think that for the purposes, at least how I would consider it, it really, there has to be, some intentionality, some, we'd mentioned before, again, some of a business or a family aspect of who they had picked. Again, there was a clear consensus on what had happened, and then, there were people that were present at that meeting that gave their opinions on what they, would think. Again, there were people that even said, "Hey, I'd like to be considered for this spot," and I think they actually had voted on two different. I think Kathy Phillips was there. I think she had expressed
Right.
interest in filling a spot, and then for the public not having an opportunity to weigh in. The public's been weighing in on this at every meeting for a year now, so that's kind of how I think that there may have been some urgency to fill the spot, but that seemed to be the general public interest as I see it as well, and not anything unethical.
But with so much interest, I think that this is where the lack of objective judgment comes in, is why not state your intent to appoint someone?
Yeah, and maybe that was the intention of the agenda. Maybe that was something that, I don't know, if, discussing options, maybe the intention was including that an option is to fill it. Maybe that wasn't their intention to fill it necessarily, but that's kind of how things had developed through the course of the meeting, which appears again to be within the purview of the council that night, so.
But discussing options doesn't say to anybody without additional information that there's an intent to make a motion, to vote in one way or another. It feels to me, if there was an intent to do that, then that should have been reflected in the wording of the agenda. And if not, then to the chair's point of view, why not take more time? I mean, I'm just asking.
Yeah,
This is
no,
where
I
I'm
mean,
thinking.
that's where it gets to, do you agree with it? Is it how you would have done it? Is it how you would have liked to see it done? I think that's a different question of, does it then go to the point of, actions against public interest and objective, judgment, breach of that, and, again, I guess it's open to interpretation, but.
And then there's a few other things, again, with that, that I'll kind of bring up. One is, you're right, there were some other people that had kind of put in for it as well, so there was some discussion, I think, as to some other individuals. I know Kathy Phillips had put into it, and one of the comments, I believe, stressed against her was that she lost. So therefore, it wouldn't be the will of the people for her to be appointed. She lost, but she lost by more seats than, I guess, Mr. Tinland lost by, but it's still, the will of the people the will of the people seated the board that was there. That was the will of the people. Because again, statistically, we can run a number of scenarios to where if a third vote was possible, we would have a different outcome as to who was number 3. But that didn't happen because of the reasons why that didn't happen. So I don't know if it's the will of it's the will of the people that voted for Mr. Tinland, for sure. It's that, but I guess looking at the will of the people, to me, all the noise for this entire year would tell me that the will of the people is they don't want to see something rushed and hurried and passed by. And I think what we've seen again and again and again by the comments that have been made is a lack of, let's not hurry things. Why was something rushed? What was the point of rushing something initially? Right? What was the point of it? And then we come to it again, and then something feels rushed again. And we've heard some of the same people come up again and again saying, why was this done? Why was it rushed? Why was it hurried? Circumvented, or whatever words that were used. And so I think my concern is the will of the people over the last year has been, let's try to do this the right way. But that being said, the right way under the charter is the council can appoint whomever they wish to appoint. So that's, I think, the juxtaposition is that the right way. We can argue it however we want to on a feeling standpoint for some of this. But ultimately, the charter was followed.
It seems so. I think the issue is transparency. Right.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes.
just briefly to address both Ms. McCullough's points as well as Ms. Fenn's question. I think when we look at the categories of action against public interest, lack of objective judgment, lack of accountability, leaving aside the OMA portion of it, disrespectful conduct towards city officials, I'll leave alone for a moment. But those first 3 categories, I don't, they are, even though I'm not going to quite call them legal terms of art, they are concepts recognizable in law, okay, that we deal with. And I think my legal opinion with respect to those categories is that it would be probably beyond the pale of this body to take a scalpel with respect to those three categories. It's more you're looking at the broader concept as opposed to looking at the minutia, because the moment we start looking into minutia, this body, I should say, looks into the minutia, then we're getting to Mr. McCullough's point of all of a sudden we're adding, feelings toward, with respect to what transpired. I think if you look at the broader category under the prism of the larger ethics ordinance, I think that's a proper line of inquiry.
Thank you. Any other further discussion right now? Again, we're kind of new to this. Should we see if anybody would like to speak at this point? Any of the players?
I think it's.
I would recommend
I
that.
would think it's appropriate if Mr. Blinsky, or Binkowski, I apologize, or Mayor Milan would like to speak. You're not obligated to. We have the documents here, but if you would like to, we'd like to be able to give an opportunity.
I'm good.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for being here on a Monday. And second of all, thanks for taking time to think about what each of these things represents. I would just like to say that if you pay special attention to the things you were just speaking of, and you look at how this council has, even in that particular meeting, handled this situation, and I would say the 3 meetings prior, there was a lot of conversation since the settlement, which you were a part of, and you were there that evening. There was a lot of discussion on what the potential opportunities for filling this seat could be. There were, I believe, 3 options. Each one was discussed. Each one had separate ideas. We did not enter into that meeting with an idea to place anyone in that seat. The agenda is not written by council, it is written by our city manager. He put on what he chose to put on. The city council doesn't meet and have ideas of what to do during a meeting. I think the theory that you're kind of placing out, that it might have been rushed and that it may have not taken certain people's thoughts into consideration. I think if you look at how that meeting played out and the parties that were involved in that meeting, who made the motions, the totality of the votes, all of those things, the conversations that, as someone very aptly stated, have been taking place for over a year about this situation, it wasn't a rushed process. It was an option, and I think it took place like most things that do when you're serving in a body. Sometimes things just kind of fall into place in conversation, and I think that's what happened that day. I can tell you for certain, no one walked in there, to my knowledge, saying, we're adding this to an agenda. We didn't do that. We acted like we do normally. We trust our council, we trust our city clerk to alert us when we're doing something that is egregious to this community. Of all the items that are on this complaint, there are a few that I care most about having my name associated with. And I think if anyone pays attention to, probably all of us on council, I won't even speak for myself, I'm just the one that gets to wear the badge of honor and dishonor for this event. We take what we do very seriously. We want to serve with honor and respect to all people, whether people agree with us or disagree with us. We don't always agree. It's part of the process. I'm assuming you guys won't all agree tonight, as you haven't in the past. But I would just like you to know that take into account the entirety of this process beyond that one meeting. And I know that the one meeting is what's being talked about here. It is not a snapshot in time. It was a progression of activities that occurred prior to that evening. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to speak, but I have to address a couple things that Mayor Milan said. She said that the city manager makes the agenda and she has no control over it. That's patently false, okay? The city council can delegate to the city manager to do things on the agenda, but
Hold on one second.
Wait, before you start again, I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Matt Binkowski, 561 Lerner.
Thank you.
The council is in charge of their agenda. And in fact, at the previous meeting on January 11th, the city manager asked the mayor to clarify what she wanted the agenda to say. And she said, and I quote, "We're going to have a discussion regarding the next steps in filling this vacant seat." It wasn't, "We're going to fill the vacant seat." It was, "We're going to have a discussion regarding the next steps." Her words, verbatim. So that's exactly what the agenda said. And that's what I was expecting when I went to the next meeting. The first meeting that I've ever attended of any Clausen meeting, any Clausen council. So instead of doing this in a impartial way where we ask for applicants of the community, collect resumes, talk about strengths, instead of doing that, the council did exactly what was done with the appointment of George Georges. They just appointed someone that the voters had already rejected. So I know this board can't turn back time and make the council do a fair process, but I think the citizens of Clausen deserve better than to be than promised a fair process and then have that promise ignored. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional comment following that?
I mean, can we get clarification on who actually does set the agenda for
Thank
the
you.
city council meeting?
I was lying in wait.
Okay.
Okay, so there's been a lot of conversation about that in Clausen recent history, even though this is a broader question that I'm responding to you. And this is true of all councils, not just this lovely city council that we have, where there's a little bit of a pendulum swing as far as the authority is concerned. However, we do have specific a section of our Code of Ordinances 235, which states, "All reports, communications, ordinances, resolutions, contract documents, or other matters to be submitted to the council shall be delivered to the city manager at least 4 days preceding the meeting. City manager shall immediately arrange a list of such matters according to the order of business and furnish each member of the council, mayor, city clerk, and city attorney with a copy of the agenda prior to the council meeting and as far in advance of the meeting as time for preparation will permit." And then it continues briefly. That presumes a process where, even though it's unstated, it's not clearly delineated. And if there is a God, the Charter Commission will take at least a portion of that. But that presumes that the city manager, through the departments, collects the information, collects and does, the background work, presents it to council. So it becomes council's agenda, but it doesn't come through them. Now, can council members ask for items? Of course. There's a back and forth. Without analyzing, if I may, without analyzing the how that actually properly works currently, the city manager is responsible for it. So the city manager can just say, "This is my agenda. This is the agenda that we're prepping for you."
Okay. Thank you.
If I may, there is an active headbutting between the council and the city manager on this process, a specifically way to spell it out. The council asked the city manager, can we have a process for putting something on the agenda? And that has not come forward yet. So this is, if you go back in the meetings, you'll see those discussions, you'll see that back and forth happen. So it is an issue,
Okay.
an open issue.
If something's put on the agenda by the city manager, though, council has the ability to amend the agenda.
Absolutely. They do it all the time.
They don't need to notice the public ahead of time, just like the notice is done for the actual agenda.
Yeah, the last one of the most recent meetings, they said, look, this is gonna take too long, we're gonna pull this off. Pulled it off. Made a motion, remove this from the agenda. Yes, 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 boom, off.
Again, I think that the agenda, as stated on the actual agenda of discussing options, again, from everything that I can see here, was, a vote was within their purview to do, and so, again, it's open to, I guess, how you feel about that, but I don't have anything new, I guess, to weigh in other than, what I've said.
I'm struggling a little bit with the transition from the discussion to the decision to vote. And if there was enough time to pause that and put it on a new agenda for the next meeting, I think that would have been the right course. And I wasn't there. I agree that it's hard when you're in this spot at the moment when you're having that conversation, but I think understanding the temperature of the city leading up to that conversation, I think there was a missed opportunity for transparency. Whether it's wrong is a different question, but I think it's a missed opportunity for transparency.
The other thing I just to note is, I believe the motion was not brought by Mayor Milan, correct?
I don't have those minutes in front of me, I don't know.
If I recall, the motion was brought by Council Member Sampson.
Sampson, I believe it was.
Yeah. So if I recall, he brought the motion, and then it was voted on unanimously. So, to that extent, the will of the people is the elected body that currently stands. And I think the elected body speaks through the will of the people, or they're supposed to speak through the will of the people, if I said that the right way. But, and in this case, we had all members that were rightfully, let's say rightfully elected, actually elected to the position, take a unanimous vote, which that unanimous vote then by itself amended the agenda. Which it sounds like they didn't have to actually make a motion to amend the agenda. They can just, again, amend it just by action. Amended the agenda. And then again, voted, again unanimously, to appoint Mr. Tinlin to council. Any further discussion, or should we put this to vote?
I'm ready to vote.
Ready to vote? So what we did last time, and it probably is good this time, so there's no confusion, is we actually voted
Both ways.
In both ways.
Yeah, someone made a
In the
motion.
affirmative and in the
Yeah.
negative, just so that there's no confusion either way.
What do you mean?
We voted,
Amounts of confusion. I thought that was more confusing.
Why don't we start with
okay.
I make a motion that Mayor Paul Milan did not violate the code of ethics as brought forth.
I'll second that motion.
Discussion?
Any further discussion? So again, just for clarity, you made a motion that she did not violate.
Are we determining the selected violations because there are several as a group?
My motion would encompass all of the stated.
Chairman McGinnis, do you agree as the second?
That's how I took it, as the second.
Okay, let's make sure.
But it's open for discussion now, so if we'd like to do it a different way.
I think all is one is reasonable.
I mean, if there's a violation of any one part, there's a violation of the ethics ordinance.
And if we can't determine that to be the case, if we can't determine a violation of all of them, I mean, or none of them, how do we vote?
Well, I think Mr. McGinnis is correct. If you find that there's a violation of any one part, you're basically finding that there's a violation. The motion is with respect to totality and appropriately so, I think, as opposed to going through each minutia. Those were, if you recall, obviously when developing the form, this body developed the form in such a way to help it in the analysis, not necessarily the vote. This is one complaint at the end of the day, so you're voting on the complaint as a whole. If you find a violation, obviously you would vote no to this motion. If you do not find a violation, you would vote yes.
Correct, yes.
I guess what I'm asking is if we can't determine if a violation has been, if there's been a violation in one of those, like for me, I will say that I'm struggling with being able to define a violation against a lack of objective judgment. I don't know that we've had a conversation that makes me feel comfortable saying yes or no to a violation of that. So if I can't determine that, how do I vote for the whole?
That's what you're here to decide.
Well, I know, but I mean, you've told us that that's something we shouldn't consider, and yet we have to consider it as part of, and if any of these pieces is violated, we have to say that there's a violation of the ethics ordinance.
But I think what August is telling, and I think I agree, is that's
You
entirely.
defined it yourself right there.
And at this point, we've brought the motion, so there's still discussion, so if you'd like to discuss this point more, we can discuss that further before the vote's called. Or any of the points, for anybody.
That is appropriate. Someone would like to call the question? That would be, after a minute of silence, it might be appropriate.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be- Can anybody on the board share with me what they are determining to be a potential lack of objective judgment?
May I give you the section? I don't know if you recall it or if you did take a look at the section in their code of ethics. There's a specific part of it that talks about it. It says, objective judgment. Loyalty to the public interest requires that all matters shall be decided with independent, objective judgment, free from avoidable conflicts of interest, improper influences, and competing loyalties.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Thanks.
I think that kind of goes back to the point too of, do you agree with how it had happened, or was there, some sort of a conflict of interest, or, something along those lines, which is, again, why it's very subjective. Again, you can, any decision at all that you disagree with, you could say was a lack of objective judgment, which to me, why there does need to be that level of, unethical intentionality, conflict of sorts with, in this case of who they had picked, and I don't personally see that.
It's interesting, I think the way you're processing and the way I'm processing are different, because I'm thinking about the procedural components. And I think you're thinking about the intent to select. Is that right? I think we're thinking about this a little bit differently.
Perhaps.
I agree with you, and this complaint is about the procedure, more or less. And I agree with our mayor that this is a decision that it took a year, maybe a little bit more into making. However, the only thing that I don't agree with her is that it took a year and they did the same decision that the prior mayor did. They selected somebody that lost the election. Doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter what the intent was there. It's the same decision. It was just from not from that camp, but was from this camp. However, we're here today to look into the procedure that happened on the day of this appointment. And if this procedure was done appropriately. And our attorney states clearly that, yes, it was done appropriately because they can change the agenda and they can appoint whomever they want, loser or not. So here we are. That's my 2 cents into all this 1 year and 2 months debacle that we've been dealing with. And all those inappropriate comments that have happened throughout this 1 year in council and all other boards and all the finger pointing at which is, to say the least, inappropriate, and there's been assaulting the dignity of a lot of people from both camps, and this should stop. And I think with that appointment, this complaint, all this should stop. All this matter should be put to bed, and we should go forward. This is a city that we all live in. We work here, we worship here, we raise our children here, and we're all neighbors. All of us. And I think we should do better. We truly should do better. I truly believe that. Thank you.
Good job waiting till the end to bring all that up there.
I'm sorry. It's just the laughter
Very
at
good.
Mr. Binkowski, they were not
I-
appropriate. That ticked me off. I'm sorry.
I echo your sentiments. I echo your sentiments. Words do matter, and a lot of this stuff just it's snowballed more than it needed to. But we're here looking at this, and again, for me, it's looking specifically procedurally as well as was the procedure as outlined in the charter followed. If there's no other discussion, then we can put it to vote.
Okay, the motion on the floor is that Mayor Milan did not violate the ethics ordinance. Commissioner McCullough,
Yes.
Commissioner McGinnis,
Yes.
Commissioner Nishai.
Nushai, yes.
Nushai,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Is that Nishai?
Sorry. You, sir, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Commissioner Traxel,
Yes.
Commissioner Fenton,
Yes.
that is unanimous.
Now we do the affirmative, right?
Well, if I may remind you briefly, you don't have to.
You don't have to.
That's an it was the reasoning, and now I'm going to go off of memory, and that's always dangerous for me, so I won't do that, but the reasoning was specific to that vote based on how it played out at the
Right.
meeting.
There was an even number of
It was
people.
the way the complaint was worded.
Yeah, and there was four of you, so it made for an odd vote, and if it was a tie, so that was why we did it both ways.
Correct,
Yeah.
thank you, August. So in this case, you don't, there's an affirmative, positive vote, complaint, you find no violation, end of story. So I think you're on number 6, Commissioner comments.
Yeah, it's Commissioner comments. So, again, thank you, everybody, for coming out for this and everything. This is something that we take very seriously, I think, as a board. And we give our time and we dedicate our time to take this seriously because we do think it does warrant serious matter and attention. Whether or not people believe there's authority behind it or there's not authority behind it, there is something to be said by the fact that the city wanted this, and we were lucky enough to be able to serve at the pleasure of the city and of council, and so we're gonna try to do our job the best that we can while we're still up here. I know we have another vacancy coming up pretty soon, which hopefully somebody still keeps their name in the ring. But if not, I can hope that we don't have too many of these, and instead we go back to our boring meetings where nobody's sitting on the other side, and we just sit here and adjourn it after 5 minutes. But if there's nothing else, then I will go ahead and make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Support.
Support. McGinnis,
Yes.
Nishai,
Yes.
Traxel,
Yes.
Yes,
McCullough.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
We're
you.
adjourned.
thank you.
8:04.